Welcome back. Trump or Biden, it's going to be close. We're going to follow it non-stop here on CNN News 18. But here on the right stand for the next 20-25 minutes, we'll focus on what's in it for India. Let's quickly set it up. 4 or 5 sticky points. First up, the India positions between the two leaders. Let's start with Pakistan and terror. Critical. Trump has panned Pak as a safe haven for terror. In August, Joe Biden held out a full-throated support to India. So similarities there. Offered to mediate on the Kashmir issue, has raised concerns on Kashmir, CA and NRC. So there are two variant positions as far as Biden and Trump are concerned, Pakistan and terror. Let's look at the other aspect. Issue number 2 is on China. The China factor. Hawkish considers China a foe, an adversary. Many say he turned like this when the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus went out of control, and in the U.S. sees China as a fierce competitor. That's Biden's position. Enabled U.S.-India strategic framework, talked of Indo-Pacific, may strive to bring down unnecessary tensions, laid strong basis for defense security cooperation, backed India on China's LAC aggression. This is as far as August 2020. Trade and tariffs. Another sticky issue where accused India of unfair trade practices and being tariff king, expected to review the imposed trade restrictions, demands major cuts in India's duties, expected to re-enter global trade agreements like TPP, and of course seeks a market access for US farm products in India, likely to prioritize working with allies to reform WTO. So here Biden works more for us trade and tariff wise. Last most important aspect also immigration and outsourcing, human resource. Intensely protectionist, sees Trump's policies as racist and discriminatory. But is he going to toe the same line? That's the big question that we're going to ask. Clamp down on H-1B visa and green card rules, keen on reducing restrictions on H-1B visas. But America first is going to be priority for both of them. Tightened up contracting jobs to India, wants to increase taxes on outsourcing. So at the end of the day, everybody's going to look at their own nation's interests. They're going to word it differently, but what's in it for India and who's better? Let's get into the debate with our August panel this evening, and it's for them to take this forward. Joining us this evening, first up is Neelam Deo, who's the director, Gateway House. Nish Acharya, CEO of Equal Innovation with us. Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO of US ISPF, that is a US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, and Preeti Davra, columnist and Managing Director, Asian Century Advisors. Neelam Deo, may I start with you?
Yes, please.
How would you see this, Trump or Biden? Who's better for India?
You know, I think they're both probably just as good for India. It depends on small things here and there. So one of the cardinal rules in diplomacy is that you don't want to be surprised. And certainly Trump has not played that game in the traditional way. He has really destabilized China, but he has also destabilized friends and allies in Europe. I think that Biden, when he comes in, will be a more traditional player, in the sense that he will go through institutions, policy will be formulated, it will be implemented, he will bring especially the European allies together, and so maybe be more effective in the policies that his administration wants to pursue. From our point of view, predictability for us is important, but we are quite at an advantage if our competitors and rivals and unfriendly countries are destabilized. And in that sense, Trump was very good for India.
But Trump was also kabhi haan, kabhi na, Twitter, his own individual personality. Is that a larger aspect beyond just the policy and that was taken? Mukesh Aghi, where do you stand?
Well, nations like predictability, and it's important they understand where they stand with other nations. When you look at between President Trump and Vice President Biden, it doesn't matter, because I think the support for India is bipartisan. The style is going to be different. While President Trump's style is very transactional and controls everything from the White House, I believe the Biden style will be very multilateral. They're going to focus on issues on energy, climate change, geopolitical alignment, trade, H-1B. So I think it'll be a much more structured approach, much more predictable approach, where India can basically step in and discuss those. So I think while regardless of who comes in, India has a bipartisan support, but I believe from Biden it will be a much more multilateral approach rather than a transactional.
So is a multilateral approach better for us from an India perspective or transactional from an India perspective, Preeti Dabra?
Yes, I actually think that there are pros and cons for both, as has been said before. As you know, I was at Howdy Modi and I was one of the official spokespeople. So, but it has been a year since, and a year is a very long time since that day. India at that time did need Trump's support, and he was very, very clear about unconditional support on Kashmir. And although he played a fine line with Pakistan, it was clear that he was on India's side on that. He stayed out of India's domestic matters on CAA and NRC. He's been unpredictable in terms of H1 and trade deals, but I think that sort of Trump's negotiation style. If he was to come back to power, I think, we go back to where we are, and I think we're in a pretty good place. But I think with Biden, people have a lot of concerns that, they would be raising their voice for Kashmir issue against the BJP. It's not clear that they would do it right away, because I think there's a lot of pragmatism on that side too. And, Biden has worked very well with Modi in the past. And people know that this is a real strategic partnership, and I don't think they're going to shake the boat very much. But like it has been said before, I think it'll be a more predictable relationship, and it could turn out to be a better relationship also.
No, so are you saying that if we ran into rough weather with trade as far as Trump is concerned, in this case in terms of foreign policy or certain decisions that India takes in the region, we may not get overt endorsement, or we may have a certain level of US interference which happened, because even with CAA or the NRC and abrogation of Article 370, there was a lot that happened in the Democrat corridors where the Republicans did not say much as far as the US Congress was concerned, or individual panels or groups within the Congress were concerned. Nish Acharya, where do you stand?
So I think a Biden administration is going to be very, very good for India. A lot of the issues you mentioned are important in India. They're not really on the radar screen for American politics, whether it's the naval activities that are going on this week, which is a wonderful thing, or CAA or Kashmir. I think both leaders, Modi and Biden, will be very focused on COVID-19. And there, I think there's an enormous opportunity for alignment of values and collaboration. There's American innovation, and there's India's capacity to manufacture in the pharmaceutical sector. And I think what you're going to see, because Vice President Biden has been so focused on COVID-19 and a plan to execute, he's going to reach out to Prime Minister Modi and say, look, what can we do together? We have 5-6 vaccines in the pipeline. India has vaccines in the pipeline. India has the capacity to manufacture doses for the whole world. The vaccine doesn't honor boundaries. And so I think these two leaders are going to come together to solve the overwhelmingly dominant crisis we're facing. The CAA and all that stuff is 9th or 10th on the list. And the second point I would make is, if you look at the actual economic agenda for Prime Minister Modi, it aligns very closely with the democratic agenda in the United States. Prime Minister Modi has done Jan Dhan Yojana, Swachh Bharat, health insurance, Aadhaar. All of these activities have been pro-poor to connect disconnected Indians to the formal economy and raise their income level. It's very similar to what the Biden plan is. It's about putting money in pockets of people and getting them out of this recession that we're in, restarting the economy. Prime Minister Modi is not doing tax cuts for the rich in India as his strategy. So I think the alignment both on COVID and on economic issues is very clear with Biden and Modi, and I think the partnership is going to get back on track where it was before, and not caught up on some of these things, which I think in the broader picture are side things.
But my thought is year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, if we look at it in terms of progression, how do you see this progressing, Neelam Deo? Nish Acharya believes trade-wise and also in terms of COVID cooperation, Biden would work better with Prime Minister Modi than what Trump has done so far. Why do you think, Trump would be, or would you want to counter that or agree there? Neelam Deo.
I think that we should not forget that quite a lot will depend on what happens inside India as well. I am not inclined to believe that there will be big changes, that there will suddenly be a Biden administration which is going to be completely different in many ways from what the Trump administration has been, except for being more systematic about what they do. But I do think that in a post-pandemic world, there are areas where India and the United States will work very well together. Pharmaceuticals is a big area, and Indian companies have already shown that they can go beyond the production of generics. I think this will be an area which will be in what are called the trusted supply lines, not the cheapest supply lines, which used to be the way countries operated and companies operated earlier. And so everything ended up focused on China. And there are, again, India is a natural for IT supply lines and for production and manufacturing of IT products to come to India. I think the market will determine a lot. I think what Indian policy decisions taken will determine a lot. It doesn't all depend on what the Americans choose to do.
But and also in terms of personalities, in terms of individual personalities, there is also another aspect, and I want Mukesh Aghi to come through. Has India managed the corridors very well, both sides? Because you may have the president or the White House, you would have the Senate, and you would have the Congress, and everybody would be, the balance would be tilted either ways. We could have a situation where both sides would be important to us, for us to engage as a nation, to ensure that there is parity and it works to India's advantage. Have we hedged our bets well as a nation? Mukesh, the question was to you. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I can hear you. Prime Minister Modi has done an excellent job building personal relationship all the way from Putin down to Macron to President Trump. But you have to understand, it's not the personalities which define the interests of nations, and they do matter, but they don't matter as much as we think they do. I think what we are going to see, the big elephant in the room is China, and under Biden, a lot of those policies will be defined in its relationship with China, how it impacts India. For example, earlier it was mentioned on generics. India today supplies 40% of the US generic drugs, and almost 70% of generic drugs API comes from China. So there's a risk factor for the US on the supply chain. That is shifting dramatically. Look at on 5G, a concentrated effort has been made by US to make sure that countries do not go Huawei. And so that shift is happening. So I think the elephant in the room is China, and the way the relationship are going to shape up with US and China will have an impact on its relationship with India itself.
And do you see that favorable for India under Trump? Or do you believe that even Joe Biden will have to pull away from China, because that's a global policy now? People are waking up to the fact that you have to have an alternative supply mechanism. India is also reducing its and consciously reducing its dependence on API as far as China is concerned. We've reduced the footprint down to about 60% from 70% that you said. So all of that, will that make a difference? Or do you still believe that Biden is not going to be as aggressive against the Chinese as Trump has been?
I believe Biden will be as aggressive, but in a much more structured fashion. You have to understand, on both sides of the party in the US, China is seen as the new enemy itself. And I use the word enemy because in every aspect, from trade to intellectual property rights, you're seeing a fissure increasing between the two countries.
Yes.
We are seeing a strong interest by US companies to look for alternate destination, and India plays a very pivotal role in that environment. But more important, for US companies, India also becomes a critical market, which is a growth market, and they want share of that market. When you look at companies like Google, Uber, or Facebook, they all have dominance in India and they shut out in China itself. So I think US companies are putting a lot of pressure on this administration or the new administration to make sure the trade relationship, the opening of the economy continues between US and India.
But in this case, data sovereignty or data colonization has been an issue which has been raised. Preeti Tavra, I'm just going to ask you, where there is no Twitter in China, but then China exerts an influence on Twitter. There is no Facebook there, but it exerts an influence. So this Chinese expansionism from all fronts, how is the US going to be under Biden and under Trump? Because America is also very, very largely dependent on China. They can't even take them on beyond a certain point because China buys into a lot of the American debt.
Absolutely. And actually, I think if we just step back a little bit, I'd like to say that people have to acknowledge the fact that in this year, where every economy has been decimated, China has come back. They have managed the virus, their economy has grown. And this is, this is not a country that anybody wants to have long-term negative partnership with. Because, as the wind, like 2 years back, India had a great relationship with China, even till last year. And I think that India would like to have a steady relationship with the US and a steady relationship with China. So I think that there's not going to be too much difference in what is happening right now. I feel that Biden will have a better policy in terms of H1 and green cards. And, I think he may be given a little bit more concessions on trade, because he'll want to come and do something that's different from Trump vis-a-vis India. So he will have to show how, he is going to be a better partner for India. And again, just like India does not want to take on China or US and, as adversaries, even if some positions require them to do so. Similarly, US will have to reach out to India, and it's Biden's responsibility, frankly, to do better than Trump. And, Trump has done pretty well for India, all said and done. So I'm actually looking forward, if Biden comes to power, I think let them compete for India.
Well, will they compete for India? That's a big question. Nish, final word, I've got limited time. I just want to understand, where do you stand beyond the pandemic? I'm just saying that a vaccine is on the forefront. It's on the horizon. So in 6 months' time, we are hoping that there will be a vaccine and it will be mass manufactured. And clearly, everybody is going to share with the world. Somebody will manufacture, somebody will devise. That's what I'm saying. That's the larger policy globally, that India will be manufacturing for the world. And like you said, there are multiple vaccines, and they would cooperate. But beyond COVID-19, what's the other aspect which is going to make India lean towards Joe Biden?
So again, I think American voters are focused on COVID. You mentioned some possibilities of vaccines, but remember, that's when we have the vaccine. If India vaccinates 1 million people a day, it'll still take 4 years to vaccinate the country. It'll take a year to vaccinate the United States. So this is not something that's going to be done next spring. And so I think the overwhelming focus from a Biden administration will be COVID-19 and the related economic startup. And again, I think with India, Trump has made it clear that it's America first on vaccine dosages as well. So I think the premise that there will be sharing is certainly there amongst European leaders and Asian leaders. It is not there with President Trump. And so again, I think what's making what's making Indian Americans lean towards Biden is this laser focus on these twin challenges of COVID and the economy. And so again, I think that's gonna, and again, if we can get collaboration on COVID vaccine and treatments, that is a model for intellectual property resolution for the U.S. and India for its big challenges around IP and trade. And if we can figure out ways to solve this global challenge together, I think that sets the path forward for a lot of different areas, whether it's sustainability or agriculture, whatever it might be. So I think there's a lot of reasons that Biden will be better for India. Not to mention, he'll have a lot of Indian Americans in his administration, and they will all have ties to their to their land of their home country as well. So
Well, but do all these Indian Americans think like the way India thinks in terms of the geopolitics and the strategy around this region, and do they identify with that? Because that is going to be critical from the India perspective. I'm just looking at it because strategically a lot of these issues are going to be important for us. I thank all our panelists. Thank you very much. Quite engaging this chat, and we'll take this forward because the coverage is continuous here on the US elections. But as we wind up, I just quickly want to show to our viewers, beyond the political parties or the partisan politics, what are the issues which are common, which are bipartisan? Becca, that sets the stage for large-scale military cooperation, and that's been already inked. 1 week before the elections, we had Mark Esper and Mike Pompeo here in India, and that was inked. So the 2+2 dialogue has been institutionalized to oversee bilateral consultations. Then there is also permanent in space, maritime and cooperation as far as and exchange, and also joint military exercises at the tri-services level. So these are aspects which continue beyond, irrespective whether America was Democrat or Republican. Technology barriers largely have been overcome, and cooperation against terror at global forums. So all of these aspects, there is commonality. The rest, we'll see how America votes. That's all we have time for. Let's hope nations take the right stand. We're going to wind up, but coverage on the US elections continues here. Stay with us.